So, as a part of SAP ABAP, whatever the topic we have discussed till now, it is just a foundation to your ABAP programming, or we can say basic concept. If you want to construct a dream home or any commercial complex, you must have the strong basement, strong foundation. And after that, you can place the column, you can place the wall, and on that, you can have the slab, and then you can do the interior, and then you can start staying. This is how we're supposed to do. So very first you must have the strong basement, strong foundation, and that is what we have done till now. Whatever the things, whatever the topics which we discussed till now, it is just a foundation or basics to your ABAP programming language. But in real time, as an ABAPer, whatever the object we are going to deliver or whatever the object we supposed to work, those concepts are part of RISEF. So in the interview, they must ask you, are you familiar with RISEF concept? So don't get confused. So RISEF stands for, the R stands for reports, I stands for interface, C stands for conversion, E stands for enhancement, and the F stands for forms. And there is a W also, RISEF W. Sometimes they will ask you, do you know about the W? So W stands for two things. One of them is workflow also. W stands for two things. Actually, these are the two different topic. W stands for workflow also, but W stands for WebDin Pro also. But this WebDin Pro topic is totally outdated, but still workflow is active. So it is totally depends. We do have 1 or 2% of chances to work on these topics in real time. We do have the rare requirement. If you get the requirement, then you can learn, you can apply the things in your real time. But if I'm just giving you the like hint, so don't confuse with the W meaning. W stands for workflow. Same W stands for WebDin also. Means these are the two different topics, but both start with W only. So if I want to give you the background behind this workflow and the WebDin Pro, workflow is nothing but the approval process. If you're working for any organization, if you want to take the leave, you need to take a approval from your team lead or maybe manager or something else also. So sometimes what will happen to, like if you're working for a small organization, you can simply drop a mail and you can ask verbally also. But if you're working for the big organization, they do have some process. You need to place the request from some website, some tool. That request will go as a approval to the your respective lead or the manager. If he's absent, she is absent, that will go to the higher level. So this approval process will be built in SAP by using the workflow. Workflow basically approval or the rejection process which we do have, that will be going to build by the workflow. With the WebDin Pro, actually SAP ABAP is a part of desktop based application. It is a desktop based application. Same way, we also going to design the web based application. Desktop based application means that's application, that tool is configured to your specific machine, and if you want to work with that tool, you need to log into that machine. So SAP is a desktop based application. On premise device means it will be configured to a particular system, and if you want to work with the SAP, you need to log into that system only. But now it's a internet generation. No one want to stick to your machine. Nowadays we do have the beautiful devices like mobile phone, then we do have the tablets, so on. So people want to navigate to the, instead of switching to the desktop, they want to open that application from anywhere, any devices. So in that situation, we need to develop the mobile based application or a web based application. Before 4 5 years back, we supposed to develop those application by using the WebDin Pro, but it is now outdated. We are going to develop by using Fiori UI5. You might heard about this Fiori UI5. Earlier, we supposed to develop the web-based application by using the WebDin Pro. Now we come up with the upgraded version. with a new tool called Fiori, or we can say UI5. With this, we are going to design the front framework, maybe the web-based application or maybe the mobile application, right? This is a small background behind the W workflow and the WebDin Pro concept. But we are focusing on RISEF concept, report, interface, conversion, enhancement, and the forms. So we will go one by one. The most important topic in ABAP is ABAP reports. Once you understood this report topic very well in manner, it's easy for you to understand the rest of the topic for you. The reason behind this, most of the logical part, because ABAP report is completely designed with the help of syntax, keyword, or the coding, and 99% of logical part will be covered in ABAP report only. So that's the reason if you understood this topic very well, you can easily understood the rest of topic. And it doesn't mean that you are going to focus on this report topic only and you are going to leave behind the topic which we discussed. Like part of unit 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the things we have discussed, I'm not saying that those are not important. See, the things which we discussed till now, it is just a foundation. And before you construct your next dream house, your base should be strong. Your foundation should be strong. And we just place the foundation. We learn the basic of your ABAP programming. By keeping those basic things in mind, we are going to develop the reports, right? Next, in real time, 50% of your work will be on the reports only, right? Your most of the things or work will be, or the requirement will be on the reports. And if you go with the interview process, most of the questions will be from report only. So report is very important topic in terms of rest of the topic. I'm not saying that rest are not so important. Of course, every topic is important. But most of the work, most of the logical part will be covered in the ABAP report. So we can consider it's the most important topic, right? So what is the meaning of report? Like when you go to if you're sick, you can go to the hospital to test. If you're normal flu, cold or something, already you are aware about that. You are going to take the medicine yourself and you are going to try to cure yourself instead of visiting the hospital. But like whatever the sickness you do have, we do have the 3 to 5 days of course. If you're taking the medicine yourself for the next 3 days, if you get cured, then it's fine. Otherwise, if you want to go refer to the higher antibiotic, higher medicine, whatever the medicine you're supposed to take during the sickness, that is a very generic medicine. It can be available with the easy going. But if you need the antibiotic, some higher device, like higher medicines, so you need the prescriptions. So for that, you need to consult the doctor. Without doctor consultation, we never takes any higher medicine. So before he give you the higher medicine, like he also requests you to go for the 3 days course. And if you are not okay with that, he will ask you to go with we'll do some further analysis. Maybe he can check your blood, so and so. And they wait for your reports. What is the meaning of reports? Some set of details, some data set of details in the format of rows and the column. So here also we do have that meaning is remains same. Report means what? Your data which is in the format of rows and column for the further analysis. So the report is nothing but analysis and the decision making. So you are going to analyze your data, and based on that you are going to take the decision. That is a part of analysis and the decision making. Report is nothing but you are going to analyze and you are going to take a decision. Real time, the data is very important for everyone. Normal in medical term also data is very important. Normal human being, what should be the blood pressure, what should be the sugar level, what should be the pulse, right? What should be the blood, right? And if you do have the vary, and based on that, they will start the treatment. Yes. And for that, you need to go with some further investigation. They need to wait for the report. By analyzing the report, they will take a decision what medicine should be prescribed. Same way. In SAP also, we are processing the data. We are storing the data in set of database tables. We are gathering those data in format of report to do the further analysis. Now there is nothing new. A report is not a nothing new for us. The like whatever the programs which we designed till now, like we have taken a different example in our day one, starting from day one. Like we have taken the example of work area, we have taken the example of internal table structure, table type. For all those we have created a separate program, right? Then we have discussed on the inner join, then the selection screen topic, then for all entry, then modularization technique. For each we have created the separate program. Even report also going to be created with the same SE38, with the same type of program executable. Then why we are giving the separate name to this as a ABAP report? Whatever the things we supposed to do in real time, everything will be having some format. Everything will be having some rules and the regulation. Now, when you're learning anything like two-wheeler or the four-wheeler, very first time, you go to the open ground, like no one should be there. And if you're running your vehicle on the ground, you don't have any regulations and the rules. You can drive anyway, however you want. But same vehicle, if you're running on a public road, you do have the government rules you need to must follow. You always have the keep left, right? You do have the like a minimum speed of your vehicle. You need to give the proper indication before your turn, have a proper distance between the two vehicles, and there is a seating capacity of every vehicle, two, three. Accordingly, you need to manage. That is whatever the programming we done the programming without any rules and the guidelines. It means you are running your vehicle on a open ground. That is what we have done till now. Now the same vehicle I'm taking on a road. If you are taking a same vehicle on a road, you need to follow the government rules. So of course in India we always keep left lane. It doesn't mean that, oh, I don't want to follow the rules, I will go with the opposite lane. Then there will be two issues. It is an offense, there will be a fine. Otherwise, there will be a accident, right? You are going in opposite direction. Of course, the opposite person is in a correct lane, but you are in the wrong lane. Anything could happen. So these are the things. Same way, whatever the programming you have created, same programming we are going to create it now, but following some SAP's proper rules and the guidelines. Now, can ask me in terms of what that rules and the guidelines. To make your program more scope, like to improve the scope of your program, visibility of your program, we need to use some set of events. The major role in the ABAP report is events. Events are nothing but this is some action. you know Events nothing but some actions, and there is a common definition of event will help for others to perform the operation. By using that event, we are going to perform some actions so that we are going to improve the visibility, scope, and the feasibility of your program. Designing the same report by using the event, we can call it as a ABAP report. So here I can say the programming which we have done till now is without programming structure. Either you can say structure, either you can say format, anything. Nothing but event. Designing the same report with proper structure format. Nothing but by using the events called ABAP report. So whenever you're working with the ABAP report, every report contains three parts. Every report contains three parts. one with data initialization. During that data initialization, you can do the validation as well. Okay. So every programming contains three parts. One with data initialization, then comes with processing and the display. It means this is a part of your input. Based on input, you are going to validate your data. And based on that, you are going to extract the data from the database. Based on your report, you are going to extract the data from the database. So this is a part of your extraction, request, and this is a response. This is a part of your extraction. You are extracting the data from database. Right? So this is your database. And based on that, you are getting the output. Every report contains three parts: data initialization, processing, and display. Again, I'm telling, there is nothing new. We have done this already in your previous example. Whatever the programs you have designed in SE38, we have already done this one. But still, when you start learning a two-wheeler or four-wheeler, it's my basic ethics to give you the guidelines. What is a brake? What is a clutch? How to ride? When we need to put the first gear, we need to go with the second gear. When you go with the third gear, how to take a turn, how to take a judgment. This is my basic ethics to give you. Even during the ground, when I take you on the road, then also I need to remind you all about the rules and the regulations which you need to follow. Same way. Now, whatever the programming we have done without a programming structure proper. Even SAP is also having some proper structure. You know, if you're working under any team, you need to follow that project code of ethics, we can say. Right? Every project, every organization will be having their own coding guidelines, their own having the ethics, which you need to follow. Rules and regulation. If you're staying in family, your parents will be having some rules which you need to follow. Same way, even SAP also come up with some programming guidelines, some rules you need to follow. If you're not, see, you can go oppose to your team lead, you can oppose your manager, you can oppose to your organization. What they can you? They can let you go, means they will fire you, they will not allow you to go inside. There is opposite reactions also. Same way, if you're going for the learning, like if you're going on a public road, if you're not following the rules, then it's a big offense for you. They may cancel your driving license also. Right? So here we don't have any opposite reaction, but you need to follow the rules, right? If you want to improve the scope, if you want to improve the visibility, then you must follow that proper programming structure. Nothing but you must use those events. Without those events, you cannot fulfill the requirement. And for the client, requirement is very important, right? Now, before we go with the ABAP reports and the types, of course, in the reports, we do have the types. Now, for example, as I discussed, every programming contains three parts: one with data initialization, processing, and before we process, first we need to extract the data, and then we are going to display it. Right? Now, before I go with the events are going to take a major role in a ABAP report. So we do have the types. So here we can say types of reports. So we do have classical report, interactive report, then comes with ALV. So ALV stands for ABAP list viewer. Then comes with SAP query. Then comes with LDB reports. So LDB stands for logical database. LDB stands for logical database. As an ABAPer, we are going to work with these are the three important for us. For an ABAPer, these are the three important for us. So this SAP query is for the people who don't know about the coding. Who don't know the coding? Maybe the end user, maybe the functional. For those people, SAP come up with the SAP query, and with that they can generate the report. This is specially designed for the functional consultant, or I can say end user. See, the classical interactive and the ALB we are going to develop by using the source code. But not all the peoples are familiar with the source code or the programming. In that situation, they can develop the report by using SAP query. SAP query is only for the people who don't know the knowledge of coding and still they want to generate the report. So they can use some navigation, they follow some navigation and they can generate the report. But with the navigation, you cannot achieve everything. So it is just a temporary. And this LDB, it will be used only during the HR ABAP. You know, entire SAP is based on the business process. In the business, we do have the purchase, sales, production, finance. Similarly, we do have the HR as well. For the rest of the business process, the ABAP is different. Only for the HR, the ABAP somewhat small difference. I'm not saying that 100% difference, 10 to 20% difference you can find. And during the HR process, most of the time we need to work on the LDB reports. What is the meaning of this LDB? We will see one by one, nothing to worry. We will discuss on SAP query as well. But our major focus is towards classical, interactive, and the ALB. Here also we do have the ABAPer only. Even here also the ABAPer are going to be work on this. But this LDB reports will be used in the HR process. Next comes with events in ABAP report. Events in ABAP report. So most important question. When they started asking you the question on report, the first question will be what are the types of report? Then they will come up with what are the events in ABAP report? There is not only one, there are multiple. And each event will be having the sequence. You know, in our first day session, we discussed about SAP R3 architecture. What is the meaning of R3? We do have set of three server, presentation, application, and the database. And before we go with the R3, we just discussed about the brief history about the SAP. When did it launched? What was the evaluation we have seen? What is the journey of SAP? That we have seen during the architecture of SAP. Like, what is the meaning of one tier, two tier, and three tier, which we discussed? Now, here, if you go, SAP is having the long history. It has started in 1972 by FIO IBM ex-employer. Initially they have designed the tool in the name of SAP R1, and the company name was SAP AG. Like in India, we do have the private limited. Like in Europe, we do have the AG concept. AG means something like private limited. Now they have changed to SAP SE. SE. Now again, that is a part of private limited only. So initially they come up with the R1. R1 stands for what? You do have the single server. You do have the single server. And whenever you run any apps, not only SAP, normally in your mobile phone or in desktop. Suppose if I go with the start window and I want to open the Paint. Paint is one of the applications. So I will search for the application and I'm going to click on that. Now what happen if I click on that? In gap of 2 to 3 seconds, it will open a respective screen. It will execute the application. It will open the respective screen, right? Here I'm going to click on this. In just 2 or 3 seconds, it will open a screen where you can design like you can draw anything. If I think about as an end user perspective, it is just me, it is just a tool for me. But what if I think in the programmer's perspective? It might be some source code has been written in the background. Whenever we click on any app, whenever we click execute on that app, whatever the source code it has been written in the background, that will get loaded into memory, right? So these are the steps. Whenever we execute any app, the 5 things are going to be take place in the background. Loading, whatever the source code you have written, entire source code will get loaded into memory. Then it's going to be compile and it's going to be interpret. You do have the compiler, which is going to be compile each statement, and it's going to be interpret. If everything is okay, then it will start with the execution. And based on the execution, either it will perform the read operation on the database or it will perform the write operation on the database. Now, all these 5 activities were going to take place in one single server. We can call it as a one tier. Then they come up with the 2 tier, 3 tier, but approaches remain same: loading, compiling, interpret, execution, and the store. In the 3 tier architecture, what they are going to do? We do have the 3 different server to split this 5 activity which we are going to perform. Earlier, we are going to perform all this activity in a single server, but now we are splitting this activity in a 3 different server. So presentation, in the presentation server only, we are going to write the source code, whatever the system we are interacting, that is a part of presentation. Providing, executing the program, providing the input and taking the result from that program, everything is supposed to be done from the presentation. So that is a part of providing the input and taking the output. It is a part of your presentation server. Application server is meant for execution. Before execute, it's going to compile and interpret. And based on that, it's going to perform the read and write operation. It means your program execution, providing input, taking the output, everything will be done in the presentation. It means your program remains is in the presentation. So your loading is going to be done in the presentation only. Based on that, whatever the input you're providing, your program will start execution. And before execute, it's going to compile, interpret, and execute. That is going to be take place in the application. And based on that, it's going to perform the read and write that is on the database. Now loading means what? Whatever the source code you have written to design the application, that entire source code will be loaded into memory. Loaded into memory means ready for execution. Now suppose if you want to go on a long ride on bike, first you need to get ready, you need to start your ignition. You need to put on a key, you need to start the ignition, means that is a part of loading. Your bike has started now. Now you can put the gear, you can go on. Now how it is happening in the background? Who is loading your program? So there is an event in the background which is going to be triggered. The very first event which is going to be triggered in SAP is load of program. Very first event which is going to be triggered in ABAP report is load of program. With this, the source code which we have written to develop the application. The entire source code will get loaded into memory. Loaded into memory whenever user click on execute. When your application will start execution? When you click on execute. So as soon as you click on execute, the source code which you have written to develop the application, entire source code will get loaded into memory. What is the meaning of loaded into memory? They are just to get ready for the execution. And in that you have written many work area, internal table. You have defined the different data objects, right? They will assign the memory to hold the data. They'll get ready to hold the data. That is the meaning of loaded into memory. And that will be happen because of your event which is triggering in the background called load of program and ready for the execution. Get loaded into memory is nothing but assigning memory to data objects like work area, variable, and the internal table. And you no need to call this event, that will called automatically in the background. As soon as now, if you are running any SAP program, now if I go with the SAP system, now if I go with AC38, whatever the program you might be having. So this is my program, right? Do you know, anywhere I have written the loader program in this? Do you find the loader program anywhere in this program? No, right? See, no need to call that loader program explicitly. Whenever I click on this execute button, I will get the selection screen. Before your selection screen display, your loader program will be triggered. And your selection screen is displayed before of that, your loader program is getting triggered. That job is automatic. You have nothing to worry. Load of program will be called first whenever user click on execute button, and with that your entire source code will be get loaded into memory. It will assign the memory to all your data objects to hold the data. And after, the next event which is going to be called in sequence is initialization. Initialization is the event which will be trigger after this a load of program. And every event will be having some specific action time. They never call randomly. There is having some action time, right? Do you know, like this flight? Of course, you have taken the flight. When it will taken off from the runway, when it will get landed, by taking the specific instructions from the ATC. So the someone is there to command. Same way, these event will be triggered at specific point. They're having some action in the action time. Now, when this initialization will be triggered, of course, after getting your program loaded into memory with the help of load up program, your initialization will be triggered. Here if you look at, if I click on execute, what you are getting? Selection screen to provide the input. Before your selection screen display, the two different events are going to be triggered in background. Very first, the load up program. Second is initialization. After triggering the initialization only, your selection screen is getting displayed. That is a different thing, but here we have not used any of the event, but I'm letting you know sequence and the sequence time when they are getting triggered. So initialization will be trigger. It will trigger before the selection screen display. When this initialization will trigger, So when this loader program will trigger, whenever user execute. So here I can say it will trigger whenever user okay, whenever user click on execute, execute option, execute, or I can say run. And this one I'm giving, okay, so it will trigger whenever user click on execute or run option, that is a part of F8. But what is the action time when your initialization is going to be trigger? Initialization will be trigger, of course, you click on F8, your entire source code has loaded into memory by using the loader program. Now you're just about to display the selection screen. System is about to display the selection screen. Before that only your initialization will be triggered. Now what is the purpose of this? Even with the loader program, we are assigning the memory to your data object. What initialization is supposed to do? So events are going to be helpful for others to perform the operation. They will help others to perform the operation. Loader program is going to help your data object to get allocated the memory. Like what initialization is supposed to do. The purpose of this initialization, it will be used to set the default value in selection screen. So initialization will be used to set the default value in selection screen input field. It will be used to set the default value in selection screen input field. And also it will be used to set, or it will be used to provide the label for
This conference will now be recorded.
it will also be used to provide the label for selection screen input field and the block. Selection screen input field and the block. Like in the previous example or in the last session, we discussed about the sub objects in ABAP editor: source code, attributes, variant, documentation, and the text element. So the text element will be used to provide the label for your selection screen input field as well as the block. You can provide with that also. You can provide by using the initialization. But the major purpose of this initialization event is to provide the default value in selection screen. The main purpose, the main use of this initialization is to provide the default value in selection screen, and it will be also used to provide the label for selection screen input field. So this is the second advantage. The main purpose is to provide the default value. And when this initialization will trigger? Before display the selection screen. Now for example, now this is your selection screen. Now what I can do, I will just remove the label from here. Now if I click on execute, s underscore Kunnar for Kenyaman Kunnar, Eradat for VBAK Eradat, Weblin for sorry. Okay. So can you see this selection screen input field? Kunnar, Weblin, Eradat, and the land one. Actually, I need don't need that's fine. That's fine. So you do have 4 input in selection screen. So as now can you see I'm going to click on execute. Can you see this execute button? If I click on execute, the 2 events are supposed to be called in background in sequence. Very first, your load up program is getting called, and because of that load up program only, whatever the program you have written, that has loaded into memory, and it has assigned the memory to each and every data objects. The second is initialization, and that initialization is triggering before display the selection screen. And before you get the selection screen, 2 events are getting triggered in the background. But you need to use those events to fulfill your requirement. Now, what is your requirement? Now, what user is saying, there is a requirement. Now, what user is saying, when I click on execute, I'm getting the selection screen. I'm okay with that. But your selection screen input field is empty. But here you need to pass the input here. You need to pass the input and you need to click on execute so that you can get the result. But what user is saying, I want the default value in my input field. I want a default value called 1000 to 1010, this 5000 to 5500. I want the default value in my selection screen input field. See, as soon as if I click on execute, my selection screen is empty. He is saying that I don't want that empty selection screen input field. Instead, I should get the default values like 1000 to 1010, 5000 to 5500. If I want, I can change it. But I want that selection screen input field called Kunnar and a Weblin with some default value. I want the selection screen Kunnar and the Weblin field with the default values. Now, how to fill the default values? And already we know whenever you're working with the select option, now here I'm placing the breakpoint. Whenever we provide the selection screen with the select option, and in that if we fill the data for that select option in the background, the internal table will be created with the 4 field. What are those? Sign, option, low, and the high. Whenever we create a selection screen with the select option, system will create an internal table with the 4 field: sign, option, low, and the high. right? Now for this S underscore Kunnar, 4 columns, sign, option, low, high. Here I have passed the data 1000 to 1010. So it has filled with the default internal table I, BT, low and high. Similarly, I have provided the Veblen as 5000 to 5500. Now here you can see sign, option, low and high. Now here if you go with Eridat and the land one, we have not filled anything. So these two are empty. Eridat is empty, land one is empty. Right? Now what is your requirement? User want the default value. Whenever I click on execute, whenever I get the selection screen, that selection screen should not be empty. I want the default value in a Kunnar field. I want the default value in a Eridat field. Later, if I want, I can change it, but I need the default values. Now just think in a reverse way. Whenever you provide the input in a selection screen, and if you check in the debug mode, these internal tables are going to be filled. Means after providing the input, the internal table is being filled. Now what user having the requirement? He want that selection screen input with the default values. What does it mean? You need to prepare this internal table in advance. When we prepare this internal table in advance, it means whenever we get the selection screen, we will get the default values. It means before we trigger the selection screen, before we display the selection screen, we need to fill this internal table in advance. And how we are going to fill that internal table in advance? And how that internal table data need to be populated in selection screen before your selection screen displayed? Your initialization is going to help out. When this initialization is going to be triggered? Before display your selection screen. And in the selection screen, if you want the default values, then prepare that internal table in advance under the initialization so that your your selection screen comes with the default value. How? Now here you can see we go with initialization. As I discussed, we need to prepare the internal table in advance. So this is the internal table which is going to be created with the same name, header line and body both. So first we need to prepare the data in header line and we need to append in body. So S underscore Kunnar hyphen sign is equals to I, S underscore Kunnar hyphen option is equals to BT, S underscore Kunnar hyphen low is equals to 1000, S underscore Kunnar hyphen high is equals to 1010. And then we are going to append the data from your header line to body, right? Just save, pretty printer and activate. Now we have prepared internal table in advance with the help of initialization. And when your initialization will trigger? Before display your selection screen. Your initialization will trigger before display your selection screen. So that we are preparing this internal table in advance so that we should get the default value in selection screen. Can you see? If you want, you can change it. That is not an issue. If you want, you can change it. But I want the default value in selection screen whenever I click on execute. See? Right? Next, similarly, he want the input in Eridat also. Sorry, Weblin also. So we are preparing the Weblin, S underscore Weblin hyphen sign is equals to I, S underscore Weblin is equals to, sorry, option equals to BT, S underscore Weblin hyphen low is equals to 5000, S underscore Weblin hyphen high is equals to 5500. Then we are going to say append S underscore Weblin to S underscore Weblin. It should be option. See, if you want, you can change it, not an issue. But by default, that selection screen come up with the default value, and that default value we are going to fill in this internal table by using the initialization. Why? Initialization will be triggered before selection screen display. Initialization will be triggered before your selection screen display.
This conference will now be recorded.
So very first, your load up program will be triggered, and after that, your next event will be triggered in a sequence is initialization. And after that, your third event is going to be triggered in sequence. That is a part of at selection selection screen. See, every event will be having some triggering point plus sequence. Every event will be having some triggering point plus the sequence as well. You cannot call any event randomly. No. And no need to call that at load of program explicitly. That will call automatically. You have nothing to do with that. That will get called automatically. You need to call initialization based on your requirement if you want to set the default value in selection screen. And the next is at selection screen. If you are using initialization at selection screen both in your program, in that situation, initialization should be written first, then followed by at selection screen. As I told you that every event will be having the triggering point. So it will trigger after display the selection screen and before leaving the selection screen. Before leaving your selection screen. So this is the triggering point. But now you can ask me what is the purpose of this? It will be used for validation. To validate the input from selection screen field. You know, if you are staying in metropolitan city, if you are staying in any of the society, when you are visiting your guest, every society will be having some security at the gate. They will ask you, whom do you want to visit? Then you need to provide the detail, which wing, which floor it is, what is the like guest name. So they are going to enter all your details along with the taken photo of your also. They will take the photo. They will send the request to your guest. If they approve, then only they will allow you to go. Otherwise, no. That is what they are at selection screen. It is your gate security. What input you're passing, he is validating that input with your database. If that input is correct, then only he will allow you to go further. Otherwise, he will stop you at the gate only. Right? So at selection screen is, suppose whatever the input you're being passed here in the selection screen, I want to go further. I want to allow the persons to go further only when whatever the input he entered is correct. Suppose anything is goes wrong, you can restrict at any place, any kind of validation. It is not only input validation, it can be anything. It can be anything. So major purpose of this at selection screen to validate. Now what kind of validation you want to do? What kind of? So my restriction is what? I want to give the restrictions to the end user. He should not enter the customer value lower than 1000 or he should not enter the customer value higher than 1000. Or maybe I can go with the date. I want to put the restrictions to the date. Like you will be allowed to see the result of only between these dates. You will be allowed to see the result between these dates. If you are trying to enter less than 01/01/1997 or which is greater than 31/12/1997, then there will be error for you. This is the validation I want to do. You can validate single field also. You can validate the multiple field also. Sometimes you can have the buttons also, push buttons. You can validate the push button also. There are many validation. We do have the different validation. If you want to do any kind of validation in the selection screen, then you must make use of the at selection screen. Now within the at selection screen, we do have the sub events of at selection screen. Here I can say sub events of at selection screen. Like now here if I go at selection screen is itself a event. Then we do have at selection screen output is event again. At selection screen on field. Then we do have at selection screen on value request for field. Then we do have at selection screen on help request for field. Then we do have at selection screen on block we do have. What do you want to validate? Do you want to validate the selection screen input field? You want to validate the selection screen block? You do have the different validation, right? There are 8 to 9 subtypes we do have. Like on field is done, on block is done. We do have on exit command. So if you want to validate when user click on back, cancel, exit, on that you can place the validation. Then we do have help request is done, valid request in. We do have the radio group. You can add the radio buttons in your selection screen if you want to validate those radio buttons. Then we do have the width, and this is something different. Just leave it. Now here you can see these are the different subtypes. This is a main event, and again the sub events of add selection screen. It is having the sequence. This is the sequence. Very first add selection screen will be triggered, followed by output, followed by on field, so on, so on. This is a sequence. Again within that selection screen, this is a sequence. So don't confuse. Now I will let you know what is the meaning of these events, when these events are going to be triggered. The major purpose is for the validation. Now what kind of validation you want to do? Now suppose if I go with this first one, so this is a part of validation of selection screen, and this is for validate the multiple fields. Now as per your requirement, how many fields are there in your selection screen? 4. One with the Kunnar, another with the Weblin, AirDat and the land one. Do you want to validate a single field or you want to validate two field or three field at the same time? If you want to validate two or three fields or maybe more than one field at the same time, then go with the at selection screen output. So this will be used to validate single field. Validate single field. This is to enable. This is our future session, nothing to worry. F4 functionality. Similarly, this is to enable F1 functionality. This is to validate the block. Like here we do have the block one. If you want to validate the entire block, you can go with the block. So it will trigger or validate during back or exit or cancel. Now I want to validate when user come back from that area. And this is to validate the radio button. Validate radio button. So we do have the different. Now in this example, I will go with this at selection screen on field. How, if I want to validate a single field, how to do this? Now what is my requirement? I want to restrict the user. I want to restrict the user. I want to restrict the user. He should not enter any date which is less than 01/01/1997, or it should not be greater than 31/12/1997. If it is trying to do so, he should get the error. Now we will do the validation by using at selection screen on field. What is that field? Error dat. What is that field? Error dat. Now here I can say if s underscore error dat hyphen low is less than, what is the format of your date in SAP? Year, month, and the day. So year is 1997, month is 01, and the day is 01. If s underscore error at lower field is less than 01/01/1997, or s underscore error at higher field is greater than 1997/12/31, then what should happen? I should raise the error message. Enter the date of financial year, any message you can provide, and the type of message should be E. Now if I click on execute, if I pass the correct input, your lower data is 01/01/1997, higher data is 31/12/1997. If I click on execute, I'm not getting the data, but I'm not getting the error. That's fine. But if I enter any date which is less than 1997, see, I'm going with 96. And if I click on execute, what message you're getting at the bottom? Enter the date of financial year 1997. Because I have placed the validation. Now, if you look at here, if I click on execute, if I pass the data 1996 to 97, if I click on execute, what is my validation over here? If lower value is less than 1997/01/01, of course it is less than 1997. We are taking the date of 96. Or this is your conditional operator, and or not, right? If any one of the date is or any one of the input is wrong, I want to restrict the user at the selection screen only. I don't want to go him further, right? And if the higher date is greater than 31/12/1997, then we should get the error. And that is what we are getting the error. Now suppose if I correct this date, and if I changing the date of this higher value. Now what is the error message? If the lower value is less than, of course it is not less than, it is equals to, and higher value is greater than 1997 1231, of course it is a 98. Then again you'll get the message, enter the date of financial year 1997. Again, if I click on execute, I don't have any error, but I'm not getting the output. But that is a different things.
This conference will now be recorded.
So we go with the next event now. So the basically at selection screen, within that selection screen, we do have many subtypes. But the major purpose of at selection screen is validation. You can validate the block, you can validate the radio button, you can validate the single field, you can validate the multiple field, you can validate the checkboxes, you can validate the push button what you are placing over there. There are the different validations, right? So if I go with this example, okay. So next event is start of selection. Start of selection. Now here if you look at, see, your Kunnar value is 1000 to 1010, your Veblen value is 5000 to 5010, and here I'm passing the date. And if I click on execute, I'm not getting the error, but even though I'm not getting the output, see, is it happening anything? Now what may be the thought in your mind? Maybe input is incorrect. Maybe I'm passing the wrong input, or maybe the input which I'm passing, based on that, maybe data does not exist in the database. Even not like that, because here we have handled the validation. If the Kunnar is incorrect, you will get the message. If the Veblen is incorrect, you will get the message. But here even I'm not getting the error also, I'm not getting the output also. What may be the reason? So the reason is this fourth event, start of selection. Now what is the like what we have to do with the start of selection? Always keep in mind, whenever we use initialization or any of the at selection screen, whenever we use initialization or any event of at selection screen, we must use the start of selection. If you are not using the start of selection, then whatever the select statement, loop, write, or maybe specifically select statement, it will not trigger, because these two will be considered as the declarative events. And if you use both or any one of them, you must use a startup selection. If you are not using this one, your select statement and further statement will not be trigger or executed. Now you can see with the same input, now you'll get the result. That is just because of startup selection. So actually this event will be called as default. You no need to declare. Even though, see, if I'm not declaring this one, then in that case you should not use these two events as well. Neither I'm using the startup selection nor I'm using the initialization or the at selection screen. So startup selection will be considered as default events in ABAP report. You no need to declare. You no need to declare. If you are not declaring, by default it will be considered. By default your select statement will be executed. Select statement is a part of your startup selection. If you are not declaring, it will be triggered. But you must use explicitly. The startup selection must be used explicitly, like either you are using the initialization. See, even during the initialization, Is it happening something? No, right? Still you're not getting the output because your below code is not getting triggered. Either use initialization or at selection screen. We must use the startup selection, right? So in the interview, they might ask you, what is the default event in ABAP report? So startup selection, it is the default event in ABAP report. It will be considered as default. Default in the sense you no need to call it explicitly. Even if you write, if you're not writing, that will be by default considered. But in certain situation, we must write the startup selection explicitly. So here I can say it is mandatory to write or use this event explicitly whenever we use initialization or and any event of at selection screen. Otherwise, select statement will not be executed. Either you can say select statement or any calling part will not be executed. Either you're writing the startup selection or if you're not writing, by default it will be considered. But in certain situation, we need to use it explicitly. It's a mandatory to write startup selection. In what case? Whenever we use either initialization or any event of at selection screen. Now, if you're not using, what will happen? See, specifically, every program contains two parts. One is declarative, another with the calling. Especially your tables declaration, selection screen declaration, structure, work area, internal table, initialization at selection screen. This all comes under the declarative. Specifically your select statement, loop, write, this all comes under the calling or non-declarative statement. So this non-declarative statement will take a ownership of your startup selection. And if you want to get it trigger this calling part, you must use the startup selection. So the main purpose, it will trigger after leaving the selection screen. And it will be used to extract the data from a database. It will be used for to extract the data from database. Major purpose of this startup selection is extraction. Next, after that, the next event is end of selection. So in the interview, they might ask, is it mandatory to use the end of selection after the start of selection? No. See, usually start of selection is going to be concluded with the end of selection. So they will ask you, is it mandatory to use the end of selection after the start of selection? No, it is totally optional. But what makes a difference if I use the end of selection? Selection means what? Extraction from the database. End of selection means the doors are closed for you to extract the data from the database. It means after the end of selection, you can write any statement, it will get triggered. except select statement. You should not use any select statement after the end of selection, right? It is major purpose of this end of selection is all your extraction has been done. Now you're about to display the data. So here I can say it will trigger after extraction and before processing. It will trigger before your first record display in output list. Before it display the first record in output list. So the reason behind this end of selection means all your extraction has been done. Now you're about to print your first statement in output list. So in the interview, they might ask you, first question, is it mandatory to use the end of selection after start? Of course, no, it is totally optional. But start of selection used to be used compulsory or mandatory whenever use initialization or any event of at selection screen. Sometimes both or any one of them. Then it's a mandatory. Otherwise, your calling part will not be triggered. But end of selection is not mandatory. But what happen if I use the end of selection? All other statement will be executed except your select statement. So you should not write any select statement after under the end of selection. So the major purpose of this end of selection is all extraction has been done. Now we are about to print our first statement in output list. So that will be with the help of end of selection. So next, of course, sometimes we need to provide the header and the footer in output list. So next is top hyphen of hyphen page. So this is the event. It will be used to provide header or heading in report output list. Like during the control break statement, we have provided the header in report output list by using the at first. So at first will be trigger very first at the only one time. So with the help of at first also you can provide the heading either for the report or the column. Same thing you can provide by using top of page also. Next, end of page. So this will be used to provide the footer. It will be used to provide footer in report output list. And similarly, we do have at PF. The PF stands for predefined function key. Nothing but push button. It will be used to add, used to set the custom GUI status. Custom UI in report output list. Custom UI means sometimes, can you see these buttons? Pattern, pretty printer, or might be you do have some different button. Sometimes user may accept additional push button. He also needs some buttons in your report output list. Suppose he need the buttons over here. He want his own buttons over here. In that situation, you need to create your own custom GUI status. And that custom GUI status after creating, you need to set it in your report output list. That we can set it by using the event called addPF or setPF. These are the two things. And these are about the events in ABAP report. So very important. Among these events, first four are in sequence: load of program, initialization, at selection screen, and the startup selection. After that, there is no any sequence. You can use randomly however you want. But this is the sequence you should follow. But we never use load of program explicitly. That will be called automatically whenever user click on execute. But initialization at selection screen, we must use explicitly whenever we require.